everyone, and thanks again for all the great lightning talks and tech talks that we just had. We appreciate a lot of diversity that we've got into this field, from FMCG, food, to property, to retail, to security. That is all great to have. Now, I would invite my panelists to join us. We have Nabila, Sofia, Tilila, and Moujahed, and then also Dr. Hind. And I would start with Nabila. Before that, sorry, if there are any questions, I would be taking one or two questions from the chat as well at the end. So please do feel free to ask your questions also in the chat directly. So yeah, the first question would be to Nabila, Sofia, with the issues that we are having recently around the availability of data. Data is available everywhere now, and then with the GDPR issue and the privacy issues that were coming, the latest announcement of Amazon and IBM about facial recognition and the use of this technology. How are you seeing women in the field being more preserved, or actually being more open into using the data, first as data scientists and also as end users? Are they more open or actually more preserved when it comes to their privacy and the privacy of other users?
Thank you, Shada. It's a very good question. I'm going to go and maybe reverse the question a little bit and tell you that from the user perspective, what I want to bring back up front is that we want more data available. We want it fast. We have Siri, we have AI, everything is at the tip of your fingers. I see moms trying to cover their kids' pictures on social media. I see a lot of those things that are active in social media about privacy, because legally those kids should not be exposed under 18. Now, I live between Dubai and Amsterdam. So right now I'm in Holland under the GDPR laws, but I'm a resident of Dubai. Because of Corona, I am here. So to go back to your question, I see a lot of women in data science, especially in cybersecurity as well, addressing the crisis mode and how we respond to it, oversharing and gathering data without validating the data. I think it's a big trend right now because we're in crisis mode, so it's fast-paced. So that's something that we guys are looking at. Wow, it's shared so fast, but is this data real? And fake news, obviously. For biometrics, face recognition from IBM and Amazon, I'm an Android fan, so I don't have an iPhone. So as well. So I would like to say that it's a little bit like, I think Hind said that, if I'm not mistaken. Our data is being used and traded on our behalf. And it's important for us to know this. I have a friend of mine, she's the lead data intake at Lululemon in the US, in New York. And she had a big debate with her team, because now when you step into a Lululemon store, for example, which is a sports brand, you get obviously ad targeted right after. So you can pass a front. There's actually, some nice perimeters set up. So you walk in New York, and if you stop more than a couple of seconds in front of the store, you'll get a nice spam, or on Instagram or Facebook, you'll get a beautiful new collection of the legging that was in the store window. So we have to be more sensitive to that you are targeted. Your data is now public. People trade with it. People aggregate it and makes a profile of it. This person is between 20 and 35, she consumed this brand and this brand, therefore we're gonna suggest this brand. So it's important to be sensitive to that, especially if you have kids, but also in general, data is a luxury, and people forget your privacy is a luxury. You get to decide what you wanna share, so keep that in mind.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree, especially that with the point that you said, basically then that our privacy now is kind of like public, or the public data is a fact, and we kind of like have to deal with it. It's really a privilege, as you said, basically now. So we'll need to deal with it that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. I would move to Tilila, and then since you are in the healthcare side, and with what we're seeing actually with the Corona situation and all of that, you might be the closest actually into really giving us some lights and sheds into how the exactly data during this crisis have actually made an impact in the industry and in the COVID situation in the country or another. What have you seen into that in this crisis?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to shed some light on that. All I can say is that data was everywhere. That's all I can say. The good data and the not so good data that's freaking people out. But I'll just touch on 2 points specifically. On the good data side, it was extremely helpful in helping us in 2 ways. The first one in understanding what is COVID-19. What is it? What is this virus? COVID has been around for a while. It's been affecting animals, doing nothing to human beings. And now all of a sudden we're infected, something happens in our lungs. So if you followed my talk in the morning, mutation alert. So in fact, when I heard that, I was like, okay, somebody gotta sequence this genome. We need to understand what's happening in here. And in fact, a lot of researchers have done that. They understood that there was indeed a mutation that happened. It happened at a connector, at a gene that makes a connector in the virus that somehow now can connect to our lungs. Before that wasn't the case, now it is the case. So this mutation happens, and then once it connects to your lungs, the virus does what the virus does, infects you and wreaks havoc. So that was the very first important finding, because once we know that, we know what we are fighting. Pharma can go and they have a very targeted, specific aspect that they can build a drug on top of. Now, it will take time that it needs to take. You don't build a drug overnight, but now we know this is exactly what we're looking for. So this was extremely helpful. The other question that I'm sure everybody is asking, or not, you should ask it as well, is, well, what is the guarantee that there wouldn't be another mutation and now it's gonna attach
Exactly.
your, I don't know, kidney or
Will
liver?
at least the data tell us if actually we will have or not this kind of mutation?
Well, the answer is I have no guarantee, and no one can give you any guarantee. This is a virus, and viruses have been around for a billion years. They live off adaptation. That's what they do. That's what they've been around for a long time, and they will keep on mutating. In fact, I've read in a paper that this virus has a fast rate of 2 weeks mutation. So some of them will do nothing, they'll just pass us like this. Some of them might touch us. So what do you do in this case? What you do is that you have to adopt the same principle as in networking. Assume breach. You assume there is a new strand that's going to attack you. So the one thing that you do is that every time you get a new person infected, you need to get that virus, you need to sequence it, you need to see what is the difference. No difference? Good. Difference? Well, pharma, you get a head start. So, and you need to plan for it. So this is where genomics is extremely important. I've read a blog earlier, a couple of weeks ago, that the UAE team was actually has done this process. They've been able to sequence. If I find it, I'll share it in the chat with everybody. So that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do.
Yeah. The second thing I want to share is the one that you've all been experiencing, and which is, so if you're a health authority, now you know this is impacting the lungs. You look at your bed capacity in your hospitals and you realize, okay, in my city, I can only handle 10,000 diseases at the same time. That's it. That's all I can. If you give me 12,000 patients, I'm not going to be able to do anything about them. You give me 15,000, I can't. You give me 20,000 people, disaster. Every city in the world has been doing this calculation. How many people having lungs issue, and I say lungs issue because it varies from a person to another, can we handle? So once you do the math, you enter into what we call trying to flatten the curve. You've been hearing this term a long time. This is the curve of people that come in our place. We need to flatten it. So once you know at any given moment, I can only handle 10,000 people, how do I stop the influx of people? How do I do that? So that's where the public health team comes in place. And they have two things that they can play with. The first one is social distancing. The second one is, confinement. No one goes out. And you also have the factor of time. So you can do some simulations. I'll also share actually a simulation for the R people who like it, so you can play around with it. So it means, and the simulation goes like this. So let's suppose we're in March. The simulation would tell you, if you do a lockdown right now, you leave it for 2 months, you'll be able to keep those 10,000 pets. Good. If you do a lockdown a week from now, you will have 11,000 people that come your way. Problem. If you do a lockdown 2 weeks from now, you'll have to keep it for 3 months. if you do social distancing, blah, blah, blah. So this is the kind of simulation that people in the public health were doing, and this is why you're having, well, you got a 2 month lockdown. We're extending the lockdown for 2 weeks because this is the calculation that happens in the background. There's a lot more to it, but I can talk more about it.
Sorry for cutting you off, Tilila, here. And I think this is exactly where it mentions basically the importance of the input data, so that actually you can predict what better decisions are best for cases. Awesome.
There's a whole topic on this one on how to input, but maybe somebody else will talk about it, so I stop now.
Definitely. I would move on to Dr. Hind, actually, and from the perspective that we just got from Tilila in healthcare and from Nabila, also from the privacy, how do you think the data is going to be used moving forward? How are we going to use the data? So we have seen that we're having this privacy issue, we're having actually this fast change of the data and fast use of the data in the healthcare system. Going forward, how are we going to actually really cope with the data, and how are we going to use it differently? How are we going to cope with the change of the data, the fast change of the data?
Yeah, I mean, if I can just recap on what Nabila and Tilila said, the data that is available for us to look at the uses so far, and the first one was already mentioned, which is predicting the need for hospital beds. And we can add that some countries were effective in doing that, and scientists had not always agreed on the models, because the models have a lot of built into them, a lot of assumptions. Some of these assumptions were right, some of them were not right. So it's not as clear. It is tricky, and it's not easy and not straightforward. And this is something, at the end of the day, the people in charge had to make a decision, and they are lay people generally, they're not the experts. So it was a very interesting to watch the interaction there between the expert scientists. So two scientists didn't agree, and what then did the people in charge who had to make a decision decide? So yeah, so the data, that was the first type of data used, predicting the need for hospital beds. The second one is tracing the patients. So that came into effect. Taiwan, I read that Taiwan had a very effective example, but Taiwan also had a prior experience of an outbreak a couple of years ago, I think with SARS, or I can't remember which outbreak. So they had the experience, they tapped into that, and they developed tracing apps. So if you're in the supermarket and then someone who is infected, you just get a message on your phone, and it helped people make decisions. That, of course, you mentioned is associated with GDPR. Can every country introduce something like that? What are the limitations? You mentioned the need for laws. Yes, so that data, what happens to it after it's no longer needed? So after the pandemic is over, are we absolutely sure that that data will not be used for something different, for purposes not intended to? And then finally, if I can break down the data itself, the types of data. So you have the data that you need to model the virus itself. You have the data that you need to model the vaccine and the medication virtually before you, nowadays you have very good, very interesting systems in place where you can actually see what the medicine, the effect on the human body before you even actually give someone a vaccine. And so you can virtually, if you like, simulate the effect on a patient and probably speed up the process which is needed. I mean, I don't think maybe 20 years ago, just to say about or to compare the importance of data to the pandemic that happened 100 years ago, killed that many people than this one. And probably it's just thanks to data that it didn't kill as much as the epidemic 100 years ago, the Spanish flu.
Shana, can I add something to Dr. Hind, if you don't?
Yeah.
Please go ahead. Yes, absolutely.
Privacy, I just want to add that I'm sure you guys know that, but there's a lot of monitoring that happens with your phone, with telecom companies. So I think one of the big factors and the gathering of data comes from telecom companies. So monitoring population movements using mobile phone data without our consent happened over a lot of breach, actually. And so I'm part of some crisis council that been formed for Corona. One of them was in Europe. And then this company, I will drop the link, called Dalberg Data Insights in Belgium, was actually mandated by Belgian government to assess a task force, and data analysts in data science were asked with Dalberg Data Insight to aggregate anonymously telecom data for 3 months. And that was done behind the back end of your phone and under GDPR, even though you don't have a certification. People don't understand that GDPR is not a certificate, it's not an ISO, it is a compliance matter. There is presently 6 lawsuits against this. I'm not going to say against who because it's way beyond, but Dalberg, and I'll drop the link in the chat, Dalberg Data Insight went up front, and how you react to crisis. Sometimes you give yourself permission to like an intrusion, you know, Dr. Hind, and you want to get data to better response, where we forget that actually this is medical data, and this is where I am, and when, and how long I'm there, and that's nobody's business usually. So I think you have to think about that because it's very important. And we also compared Corona crisis with Ebola a lot. I don't know if you guys saw that and how we reacted to Ebola outbreak, because it reached also Europe and UAE and West Africa. So that was with Innovation Lab, if I'm not mistaken, how they respond to Ebola. That also shows you data scientists, right? How we responded to a past crisis is also metadata. And so, like Tilila said,
how did we actually evolve in this? So if we can actually like get deep into this, how did we evolve dealing from that crisis before and now, obviously with the data that we have more on all of this? What are the thoughts?
Can I just comment first? There is, I mean, what Nabila was saying is absolutely spot on. And there is a clear distinction, or a clear difference, if I can say, between how societies are addressing that. Like, I think I mentioned that earlier, Eastern Asian countries tend to place society somewhat higher and interests of society somewhat higher, versus Western countries tend to place the rights of the individual higher. And that's a very you know, you need to step back and think, yeah, I just wanted to comment on that.
Absolutely.
There is a difference. There is a difference, certainly.
People overstepping, government saying, well, we have no choice, it's Corona. So they create this scoring that's very interesting for data science. That's called the response scoring and the panic scoring. And the panic scoring was given to the data of groceries losing inventory and the overflow of, I'm sure you saw, paper towel and toilet paper, which was 20. So that's also, so they triggered some data points and they aggregate that and say, okay, how do we know if the population is panicking right now? And so those data points would be inventory in groceries, inventory, believe it or not, in, well, I mean, but alcohol intake, people at home, violence. I would like to voice out that the woman was the most affected of Corona in domestic violence. We keep forgetting that some women are going to be stuck with their predators at home because they cannot go to work. And so there is a form of lost freedom when you're in isolation and crisis. So those are all data points that a lot of companies, McKinsey, PwC, and aggregate those reports that you saw popping everywhere in LinkedIn. Those are all data input. Maybe the data and then the proper aggregation. So I would like to just say one last thing. And that doesn't go for government, that goes for all the companies. In a moment of vulnerabilities, in a moment of weakness, you will find that your privacy and your data will be breached. I just want people to understand that. When there's a crisis, could be any form, you'll see that people will go to the gray zone and allow themselves to get your data. And in my role with cybersecurity, I work with data science, we see that often. There's people that have 25 years of experience, head C-suite of companies that will try with lawyers to pass new laws, new acts, new reforms into contracts just to get more data. And I want to focus on that because people don't realize we don't have to be submissive to that. There's a lot of coalition of data that you'll see forming after Corona because people feel that they've been targeted, you know. And I have a very funny story for you, and it's a 2-minute story. It's when data is shared with the wrong user. So I'm going to give a story where a daughter went to the hospital in Europe, and she'd been told she was pregnant in Corona time. And so it's a test, it's a blood test. She went to the doctor, and her father doesn't know, and she came back home and registered at her parents. And so just believe the hospitals are panicking, the softwares, everything they use, Azure, Microsoft. So instead of sending this information to her email, that was definitely personal email, the system then looked at the address, so that's raw in that aggregation, send an email to the address where she just registered, she gave it a reception, so that's her email to get the response to she's pregnant. That went to her dad because she was home for Corona. So her dad got an email for his daughter. She didn't have the time to actually tell her parents that she's pregnant, saying that you're pregnant. And that's because hospitals were overwhelmed and data aggregation was not always manually, sometimes it's AI driven and not well put in. So that's something that's funny. And this story is a newspaper because she wants to sue the hospital for saying things to, you know, closing information. But that's just so funny that because you change your address in a moment of crisis, that data would have never happened. It's not in a Corona crisis. That hospital would have not sent that email. So they were very shocked. And they investigated how many emails went out that were not to the right user. So just to give you how data circulates, it's weaker data because it's now well managed because we're in a crisis mode.
Absolutely. And I think also this sheds the light on something that's actually very important in data science, just like what we did before on storytelling and all. Here, this story specifically highlights how important is actually the pre-kind of work of the data scientists, like data aggregation, as you said. Really, in times of crisis, maybe we don't get, like, you know, more importance to data preparation and data cleanings and aggregation. What is actually important for you to do an output or to have an output that is very impactful and useful to your users, you need to actually, even at times of crisis, be cautious about these points.
Maybe I can add one more point here. I think there's two ways. There's the point that you mentioned about, that everybody has mentioned, about the importance of data, etc., of the data preparation and the sample, making sure it's not biased. The other thing, and it is a little bit of a reality for everyone, is going to be the importance of data literacy. Because right now what's going to happen is that everybody's like, show me the data, show me the statistics, show me this, show me that. So it will be used to give an impression of authority. 95% this, 63% this and that. Unfortunately now, everybody will have to have that healthy skepticism as to what they see and build that muscle. Especially if you're a business decision maker, you'll get graphs, you'll get stats. Can you ask what are the questions you should ask to healthily challenge? If you're a consumer, you'll get to see all sorts of things, and you're not equipped with the tools to back off and say, wait a second, this looks off. So this is a skill that everybody will have to develop. Take a statistics course. There's a nice book called How to Lie with Statistics. Me, myself, doing a lot of data and graphs, I'm aware that I have a responsibility. I can have the same data. I can do a graph that tells two stories, and I can back it off. And if you don't know how to challenge me, I'll tell you either way that suits my interest. Obviously, this is where ethics comes in place, obviously, but you gotta also protect yourself in this sense. And this is why we've seen so many people going crazy with the stats that were shared. So
you actually touched on a very important point, Tilila, that actually I want to close the panel with, which is how can we as women and other actually individuals use this time of crisis to actually be prepared for the next era of data. I think you said that everyone needs to basically take courses in data, be prepared to challenge people who are presenting data, and be equipped really to understand the world of data. So with that, if anyone is basically happy, I don't see any questions in the chat. I would like to thank Tilila, Nabila, and Dr. Hind for your inputs in this panel, and appreciate your insights as well. And I would hand it back to Anshal and Susan. Thank you.